Story 1. One afternoon I was at work. I walked past a room with a window in the door and automatically glanced in the window. There was a woman standing in the room, except there are only 3 people in the building and the other 2 were in the office behind me. I took a couple steps, realized what I had just seen, and backed up quickly, but by the time I got back to the window, the room was empty. There was only one door, and when I opened it, the room was empty. At the same building, a coworker was telling me that she was in the office right around the corner from that same room. She couldn't see the door, but she could see the shadow of the door on the floor as it slowly opened and closed. She was the only one in the building at the time, and she refused to check. I arrived about an hour later, and she asked me to check the door, and it was still locked. I worked there about 3 years, and every single one of us had stories. We heard voices in empty rooms. Once we were sitting in the office and we heard somebody breathing in an empty corner. It was common to be in one of the rooms and think somebody had just walked into the room, only to look up and find that the room was empty except for you. I had one manager who scoffed at all of our stories. She did not believe us when we told her there was something fairly benign but creepy in the building. We were sitting in the office. She scoffed and loudly said, "If there's anything in here, prove it." We all held our breath. Kind of nervous, a bit scared, but also curious. And just about the time my manager was getting that look on her face that said, "Ha, told you so," something was thrown out in the hallway. It took us several minutes to work up the courage before going to check and finding that a book that normally sat on a bookshelf near the front door had somehow gone from that bookshelf around the corner and halfway down the hallway. The manager never talked about it and quit shortly after that. I've since quit also. But last I heard, they were still hearing voices and seeing shadows in the building. Story 2. By 6 or so years ago, weird shit started happening in my mother's apartment. I lived there alone. She lived with her BF, but kept the apartment anyway. The door to my bedroom would open or close on its own. At some point in the night, it would close or open at random intervals, with the door handle moving and all that, and not like slowly. Sometimes it would full-on slam shut or open. I tried everything, closing all the windows to see if maybe it was the wind. Nope. Seeing if there was anyone else in the room, never found anybody, plus the room on the other side was empty except for a wardrobe. Hell, it even happened more than a few times in front of a friend. The friend in question also told me my lamp started to switch on and off when I was sleeping. Not like in the movies where the lamp malfunctions. She said it was like it was turning on, then off, then on, etc. Toward the end of this, the sofa that was right beside the door moved by itself while I was on it, in the middle of the night, while I was on Skype on camera. The door kept opening and closing a few times a night for a few days. Then it stopped. Also, I kept having sleep paralysis with visual and auditory hallucination at the time, LOL. I honestly could have thought I was simply going crazy, but I had eyewitnesses. Never understood what happened this week. Never happened again. Story 3. There was a really weird occurrence at my dad's house a few years ago. He awoke to the sound of dogs barking and realized the neighborhood dogs were barking at something that was moving parallel to the road. When his own started to bark, he went outside to see what was up. Across the street is pretty much all forest except a church directly across the street that at the time was just a gravel lot. My dad was too far away to see anything, but in the dead of night, he could definitely hear the sound of someone running at full tilt across the gravel. A few things freaked him out from this. 1. Whatever it was definitely ran on 2 feet. Try having a dog run on gravel versus a human and you can tell the difference. And it was big. Both myself and he have witnessed large animals like bears and moose running through the underbrush, and according to him, it sounded like it was of a similar size to those creatures. 2. It was easily running somewhere around 40 to 50 miles per hour in the clearing of the lot, then slowed down again as it went back into the woods. He was able to compare the speed because the road itself is 45 miles per hour limit, so it was going just as fast as a passing car. 3. The final thing, its huffing and gasping was so loud he could hear it from his front door and was obviously not human. We looked online later to compare its sound to other animals, and it really didn't sound like anything he'd ever heard before. The freakiest part was the almost synchronous reactions the dogs had. He's never heard dogs react like that before. Both him, my stepmom, My stepbrother and several of our neighbors all can account for hearing the strange barking from the dogs, but it was only my dad who heard what they were after. Nothing happened like that since, and I've never personally witnessed anything like it. We do like right on the border of the Cascade Mountain Range and are surrounded by park and federal land if you want to get an idea of where this took place. Story 4. One night I was watching The Conjuring at home with my little sister when we heard someone putting a key into our front door and opening it. We were sitting in the living room next to a sliding door that was very close to the front door, so we both heard it very clearly. Now this didn't alarm us since we knew our dad had recently gone out to get some stuff, so we just assumed he had returned. "Hey Dad, you're back already?" I casually asked. There was no response. "Hey Dad," I asked again, thinking that he had not heard me the first time. Again, silence. At this point, I get the feeling that something is not quite right, and I could tell by the look on my sister's face that she was quite nervous as well. I'll note that up to this point, she had spent the evening rolling her eyes at horror movie cliché, CSUB, and she very rarely gets scared. We looked at each other for a moment, wondering what we should do before we started hearing a few more scattering sounds from right outside the sliding door. I was frozen in fear by this stage. I tried one more time in a louder but shakier voice. "Dad, is that you? Please respond, repeated in my head. But the silence continued. Now at this point, I'm freaking out, and I literally jumped off the couch. My sister also abruptly gets up and starts rapidly walking towards the other end of the room, which leads to the kitchen area. She later revealed to me that she was planning on grabbing a knife. She had this horrified look on her face that I hadn't seen before. We looked at each other in nervous silence. I didn't really know what to do, and I didn't want to make any further sounds. I finally decided to walk up to the sliding door and began opening it as slowly as possible, peering into the darkness. I know, I literally became the idiot who investigates the unknown, creepy noise without anything to protect myself with. When the door was finally opened wide enough, I poked my head out and scanned the corridor, preparing for the worst. To my surprise, there was no one there. But what was more strange was that the front door was still completely shut. We never heard the door close. My sister and I were obviously both extremely relieved, as we were almost certain that there was an intruder in the house. After this, I immediately went to go ask my mom, who was situated in her bedroom at the other end of our house, if it was her or whether she had noticed anything. She told me that she thought my dad had come home, as well as she also heard someone opening the front door. Around half an hour later, which felt like an eternity at the time as we still quite shaken from the incident, my dad finally arrived home and confirmed that he had not come home earlier. To this day, my sister and I still have no idea what happened that night. Story 5. This is not a story involving me. It was actually when my mom was a little kid. So I've only heard this story from my grandma, who likes to tell me things like these when I visit her. My grandma was traveling with my mom and her 3 younger siblings. One of them was a baby and the others were toddlers or just young kids. Of course, handling 3 hyper kids and 1 baby on an airplane is not that fun, and my grandma was beyond exhausted by the time they took their seats. My grandma chose a back row on the flight, sitting with the 2 youngest while my mom sat in the other row with her sister. Things quieted down for a bit when they took off, but as time went on, my mom and her siblings grew more restless. Lots of whining, complaining, and crying that made my grandma wish she could just sleep and forget it all. Just as my grandma is about to lose it, a man sitting behind her taps her shoulder, and my grandma turns to look at him. He frowns, noticing how tired she is, and asks if she'd like help calming down her crazy kids. Of course, my grandma is so done that she quickly agrees. Side note, nowadays I don't think people would be so quick to hand over their babies, but this was back when strangers were a lot more chill with each other, so I guess that explains that. My grandma quietly reads, a wave of relief washing over her as the man hands my mom and her sisters coloring books and quiets down the baby by dangling an interesting toy over the seat. And for the rest of the plane ride, everything was quiet. My grandma says it was the most quiet she'd ever had since my mom was born. The plane lands. My grandma thanks the man and starts getting my mom and her siblings ready to get off the plane. Of course, she is really excited to introduce this man she befriended on the flight to my grandpa, and tell him how he saved her from a hell of a flight. My grandma gets off the plane with everyone and meets up with my grandpa. She proceeds to excitedly tell him all the details and that he should wait with them to meet the man. After all, the man was behind them and would be one of the last ones to get off the plane. They were both in back rows. 10 minutes went by, then 15. They had been watching people get off the whole time, but the man never showed. My grandma was incredibly puzzled by this. How could he have possibly disappeared when they were sitting in front of him and had gotten off the plane before him? My grandma, worried that something happened to him, stopped one of the crew members who had a list of all the people on the flight. She asked for his name, which she had learned on the flight, only to be given this response: "Sorry, ma'am, there is no Mana's name on this list." To this day, no one knows quite for sure who this man really was or where he could have gone. My grandma and I think that he was some sort of guardian angel or spirit sent to help her in a time of need. Story 6. The first that comes to mind is one I always tell my friends that gives me chills and freaks me out and will always make me feel some type of way for the foreseeable future. I was probably 9 or 10 at the time, and my dad was in the military. We were stationed in Fort Knox and lived on base in a provided military apartment. I moved around a lot growing up and have plenty of superstitious family members. So at the time of being a child, the fear of the supernatural always existed. I lived pretty normally, and then I made a friend named Dylan. Hope he is doing well these days. One day after school, his mom invited me over to their home. They also lived on base. Right away, entering that apartment, I felt very uneasy or like someone was watching me. However, as the day went by, I played with him and his little sister, and things were normal. Nothing amiss, and so on his birthday, I returned to his home for the final time. When I came through the door again, I got that uneasy feeling. This time I asked him about it, and his demeanor changed as well as his little sister's. He didn't really want to talk about it. Being young, I found that to be a bit strange. As his birthday went on, I found myself needing to use the bathroom. There were 2 bathrooms, one upstairs and one downstairs. I went to enter the bathroom downstairs, and without a missed breath, him and his sister both say, "We don't use that bathroom. Don't go in there." I didn't really think much of it until he asked if I would stand outside the door of the upstairs bathroom while he used it. Things now seemed off, and that uneasy feeling sank in. I complied. We went upstairs. He went to pee and left the door wide open and asked me not to let anyone shut it, which freaked me out because it was just me and him upstairs. I was dying to piss and asked if he would stand outside because now I was nervous, to which he refused. Angry that he didn't return the favor, I stormed off downstairs, yanked the bathroom door open, and meant to take a piss. Kind of funny, and it gets a little funnier and terrifying. 10 years old, pants halfway down, I am about ready to piss when the lights go off. The switch is inside as well as the lock, which frightens me because now I can't see and I have my pants down. Then it flicks back on and then off again, and then it begins happening a lot more rapidly. What gives me chills is that to this day, I distinctly remember seeing the light switch flip itself up and down on its own. This picks up. Now a terrified 9 or 10-year-old, I begin to panic and try to open the door. I got the door open at about a head's width and it slammed on me really hard. Lights are still flickering. I open it again and go to step out, and it slams on me even harder. Now crying for his mom or anyone, because the lights are flickering and the door is slamming on me. His mom hears me plea and is yanking on the door, to which I am pushing. Finally, the door flung open and both her and I went falling forward at the force. I cried and went home. It really ruined me being friends with Dylan, and we never talked about it. I remember later my mom asked if I remembered that story and told me his mother called and apologized. She also proceeded to tell my mom further that her and her husband had been experiencing a lot of things in the apartment. One being that she would wake up in the night to something raising the covers off of her husband and whispering his name. I don't believe in ghosts, but that is one of the most terrifying and unexplainable portions of my childhood. An experience unlike any other. Story 7. I made a throwaway to post this because people know my main, and it's kind of embarrassing, and I've only told my partner because I'm definitely the type who rolls my eyes at ghost stories and holds firm on the stance that I don't believe in ghosts. And yet, I have 2 brothers, and we all lived in a small house when I was about 8. 11 years old. All of us kids hated the downstairs. It was always chilly, which is normal for a basement, but it felt like a creepy chilly. Sounds lame, I know, but my little brother, probably 6 when we first had that house, had a room downstairs and hated it. Would go so far as to not sleep in his room because he was so frightened. He wouldn't even enter the basement bathroom. He always had awful nightmares in that house, and so did I. All of us kids still refer to it as the haunted house. It sounds stupid to type, but it just truly had a bad feeling to it. Anyways, the incident. I was heading off school, and when my mom got home, and my brothers weren't there, must have been with my dad? Can't quite remember. So I was on the computer, which was in the basement, and to my left is the staircase heading up, and my cat was sitting on the landing between the first set of stairs and the second. It's also only about 4 p.m., so it was light out and I had no music playing, so there was nothing to confuse me. This next part will probably sound minor and not freaky, but I get chills thinking of it. Suddenly, I hear hi, 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 starting as a whisper and getting progressively louder and circling the room, as though someone was running around. I might have chalked it up to me hearing something, I guess, except when the hi got to the staircase directly to my left, my cat arched her back and hissed loudly. I fucking bolted upstairs, my cat following me, and never went down solo again until we moved into our next house. Story 8, I work graveyard shift security, and the shadows don't act right. The human shadows where they shouldn't be are one thing, but I can dismiss them, even when I'm inside an unlit room illuminated by light that just reflects in and casts none. What gets me is when I'm inside and pacing around between patrols. Sometimes I see something pacing with me from the corner of my eye. It's on 4 legs, but its gait is messed up, like it has human hips and shoulders, but its 4 legs are as long as its hind legs. It's got a build like you took a dog and stretched its limbs out, then flattened and elongated its abdomen. Its head is oversized like the head of a huge boar on the body of a tall but thin dog. Like the silhouettes, it's just a shadow, and I only see it out of the corner of my eye, and when I've just been light blinded. You know how when you look at a bright light, then away it leaves an after image of the light source's shape? Instead of that, I'll see the shadow thing. It's not always following me when I see it, but mostly it's inside and I leave when I see it. The idea I have of what it looks like comes from many brief glimpses over a couple years. The worst part is the way it moves, with the body style I described, but like the music video for Schism at 317 in. Anyway, brains are weird, huh?
Thanks for watching. Don't leave before leaving a like to this video. Also hit the subscribe button to support my work. And as always, have a horrific nightmare, my dear.